everybody. Welcome to Justice Served Daily. We appreciate you all being here. And I have Mama Bear and Paige with me on panel. Hello, guys.
Hi, guys.
Thank you for having us. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We have a case that we have been trying to get up here for quite a long time that we are anxious to share with you and to talk to you guys and stuff about. And so we're going to be talking about Joseph Spisak. He is a missing paper boy from Hammond, Indiana, and which, as you guys may know, if you've watched the channel, that is a town that I kind of grew up in for a little period of time, and where my main case that got me involved with true crime, Deborah Fulton, who was the 16-year-old who was murdered, was from. So that is the interest that kind of drew me to this case that is still an unsolved mystery. We were also drawn to that case because the serial killer that we also did a video on, David Maust, who was from Hammond, Indiana, who had some similarities to John Wayne Gacy, who had murdered boys and buried them in his basement. And he was let out after being put in and out of jail and mental institutions his whole life. And he had killed boys starting in Germany during his time when he was in the army, and then over in the United States as well. And so, he was also from Hammond, and that was somebody that people even kind of talked about the possibility of, maybe involvement at the time from that. So we're glad you guys are here. Hello, Kib Kitty. Hello, Kelt. We're glad to have you all here, and we are going to start diving into this. So I'm going to go to bring up my screen here, and let's see here. Okay. Let's see if it works all right. Okay. I don't like what it's asking me. I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it this way. I'm not sure if what it's asking me is going to be the right way, so I want to make sure I am doing this correctly here.
Technology, right?
Right.
You love it
All
and you
right.
hate it at the same time.
Exactly.
I know. And then when I pull it up, I never can tell if I'm, um, doing it correctly. And I had to do this a total different way, which that's a whole different story as well, but we won't go there. So if there's any trouble and stuff on there, just let me know if you guys can't see it properly or whatnot, on the screen as we start to go through it. So, and I always appreciate your patience with my delay of knowledge and how to do some of these. But so yeah, so this is Joseph Spisak, and this he was an 11-year-old paper boy, and these are three of serial killers that were near him, and we are going to talk about this third potential one that we believe could be suspect in this as well. So let me make sure. Can you guys see that? Okay. So he went missing on January 27th in 1974 in Hammond. He is only 4 feet tall, 65 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes, very small little 11-year-old. And I wanted to point this out, and there'll be a reason for this as well. But this is before the disappearance of Johnny Gosch. And I am sure that a lot of you are, or most of you are probably familiar with the Johnny Gosch case, pretty famous, that happened in 1982. Where he went out to deliver papers and then he went missing. He was out of Des Moines, Iowa, and there was additional paper boys who had went missing at the time back then. And his mother was also part of working with Adam Walsh's father, John Walsh, in starting the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So there has not been any arrest or anything from that. I find that case interesting. So, if that's something you guys have an interest in us covering, please let me know. Because, that's something we can dive into as well.
Yeah, it's a definitely interesting case. I know it means a lot to Paige also.
So
Yeah,
I want to show,
definitely.
especially for anybody who's not familiar with Indiana. So this is here's Indiana, Midwest state. As you can tell, it sits here between Illinois and Ohio. Just south is Kentucky. Then we've got Michigan up here. So, this is where we're talking, like, Indianapolis is right smack dab in the center. And then we're going to be looking right up here in the northwest corner, which I'll show you the similarity. So Hammond, this is us going all the way up towards the northern part of the state. Now this looks like it's far away, but it's really not. So if you look at where it's highlighted yellow, where Hammond is, that yellow line coming down straight here, I'm moving my mouse. I don't even know if you guys can tell that or not, but that line itself is the state line. So when you in Hammond, you can drive, like 20 minutes, whatever, and you're already out of the state of Indiana. And it really kind of operates as the kind of southeastern part of Chicago. A lot of people commute and stuff from work and stuff here. This was a big, heavily populated area, especially near Gary and Maryville area and stuff like that. That was, steel mills and things like that. You've got Lake Michigan here. So you're talking maybe like, 45 minutes to get over here to Chicago, hitting the toll road. So it's not that far. So that's kind of give you an idea where it's located. See, this doesn't want to, is it showing the full screen? It isn't really showing on mine. it's kind of, let me see if I change this a little bit.
I think it's cropped it a little bit, the image, like it's not
The
showing it
wording.
clear.
Yeah.
The wording's cut off.
Yeah, because I'm showing it from, let me see. Oops. Well, darn it all. Hold on. Yeah, I'm using the slides from directly from the thing, so I don't want to. Let me see if I go backwards, if it lets me do that. Maybe, maybe not. So, right here, this is like the beginning. I don't want to go too much out from that. Yeah, see, it doesn't show it as much. Okay, so is that big enough that you guys can see, or do I need to make it bigger?
No, that's good.
Okay. So Joseph Spisak was last seen, and I'll pull it. This is what I'll do. Let me go over here to StreamYard, and I'll put it like, maybe like this. Do we not block? Is that any better? No, probably not.
I can
Sorry.
see it pretty good.
Let me see here. Okay. All right. So he was last seen at 9:30 a.m. on Sunday, January 27th, when he had come in from a paper route. He had dropped off his bag, and that was the last time, basically, that his mom had seen him. He had handed out most of his, uh, you know, or most of the papers, and he had collected some
Yeah.
money, most of the money. And then, they were trying to ask the mother if like he could have been a runaway, which she's like, no, there was no reason for him to run away. And in order for people to try to look for him, she had handed out most of the photos that she had of him to people that were looking. And then now she did later get some information that was shared with her. And I want to point this out. This is going to be important later. There's going to be a twist at the end of this that you guys, that kind of was a not intended, but happens towards the ending that I spotted. So you're going to want to see where the twist is at the end of this. So the mother of Joseph had said that afterwards she received messages from people who said that Joseph knocked on the doors, telling them that somebody in a blue car was following him on his newspaper route. Now, I want to point out that he was saying that while it was happening, but remember, he did get home. So at 9:30, he was home. He finished the route. He finished delivering the papers. So at 9:30 afterwards, he had made it home. He did then leave. And so the blue car wasn't anything that was concerned about at all at that time because he wasn't missing. So he was told by his teachers he was a really good kid. Police had interviewed 3 friends of his who had said that he had told them on Friday that he was thinking about running away, but gave no reason, which, we can all think about that. As a kid, you can kind of get pissed off at your parents and then be like, say stuff that maybe you don't necessarily mean of doing. But now they also did state that there were friends who did tell the Hammond Police Department that they last saw him walking near an old cemetery, and that the old cemetery would have been along Kennedy Avenue near the Norfolk and Western Railroad tracks. So this is a photo of Joseph's house and what his house looked like. Again, this was the last time at 9:30 a.m. that he was seen dropping off that carrier bag. And, so just a regular, little house in Hammond. little map thing here to kind of show you guys where that's located from. This is when information and kind of first came out in regards to Joseph. We have to remember, back then, and even if you are old enough to have been, been around when this all was going on, we had no internet. We had no National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. There are no computers to send something. There are no cell phones to send text looking for people. You kind of made a phone call and you would maybe talk to somebody, and that was about it. There was no other way, and television is not necessarily going to cover anything. We had no programs like that. We had no milk cartons or anything like that yet. So that's why it's important to point out, like the Jonathan Gosh cake, because that's the first time that anything had even thought about, let's try to start something to look for missing children. So the day that Joseph had went missing in Hammond, his family went to the Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church that is located there. And I'll have a closer up map, but this is the church they went to. And it was on a Sunday that he went missing. So his family had thought that he would join them, maybe at Mass that day. So at the beginning, police said that since Joseph said he wanted to leave home, that they could only suspect that he was a runaway in the first kind of days of the case. Which, you know what, guys, doesn't that remind you of what happens now for missing kids? It's just kind of an automatic assumption of runaway.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That happens all the time. And if you
Yeah.
don't, and I hate to say it, like you were saying before, JC, that, how many of us have threatened as children, teenagers especially, saying, oh, you're making me mad, I'm going to leave. So it's just a common thing, I think most teenagers say and go through. And
Yeah.
but it's just sad,
Right. I mean, especially if they read your diary, for God's sakes.
Oh, gosh, please.
Right. I mean,
Oh my
right.
God.
I'm just
Yeah,
gonna
if you
say,
read mine
yeah,
when I was a kid,
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. So you mean there's times you get upset as a kid and stuff from that, but I think what's sad is that this I don't know if mistake is the right word, that maybe, but except when it ends up that the child is really missing, or really,
Right.
or found murdered or whatever, you can only call it mistake. And we still have this type of mistake that happens with law enforcement now.
Yeah, I mean,
You know,
there's so many cases I think we've all seen and heard about where law enforcement will, first of all, say, they're a runaway, they'll be back, they're out with friends, they're this, they're that kind of thing. And a lot of people don't actually realize that they can report someone missing
Right.
straight away. They think they have to wait because
Right.
of that kind of
Instead
thing.
of getting on it right away, and
Mhm.
getting the word out. And
But you can report it immediately. If they tell you you can't, you ask to speak to someone else.
right, right.
Yep.
Mhm.
And that's the advantage nowadays of social media, because
Yes.
I know with the true crime private group that I run, we get information and stuff like that, about kids who are missing, that we can right away start sharing, because the mother or father or siblings or somebody tries to share that with us. And even though the police have not declared yet an Amber Alert or Silver Alert, we can still start sharing that information out, in the hopes that maybe the kid is just, maybe the kid was angry or mad or whatever. But nowadays we can't assume that the kid is a runaway. I don't think you can afford to do that. I wouldn't want to as a parent. If I don't know where my kid is, I don't want to assume that my kid's a runaway.
Right. Don't go to
No.
that as your first,
No. Especially
intuition
if the
always.
parent knows that child better than anybody else could. So if they're telling you that's not something that this 11-year-old boy would do, you need to listen to them.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Yep. So after that, we have where the Hammond Police Department, then they search around the area. So there's Optimus Lake, there's a wooded area. There is a Purdue, it's been up there forever. Purdue University Calumet is up there. And in that area, they had Boy Scouts and police who were also searching. And they did that just because Joseph would sometimes go and play in that area. And now, the other news that they got that, again, that he was last seen going southeast on the Norfolk and Western Railroad tracks about 5 p.m. on that day. So Norfolk and Western then had sent an inspector car through the tracks, but they found nothing. So they kind of, went through there. And then they also had Penn Central who joined the search, but nothing had developed. So the advantage of myself living there as a kid and knowing the area, I went ahead and I started pulling up maps and things for that. Some of these are just street view or map view, and then some of them are street, and I'm going to try to help explain and show you guys of the area that we're looking for. So if you look in the bottom left, the balloon that's right there on the left-hand side, that balloon here is the balloon where Joseph lived. And so when they say about that the last time he was seen was around Kennedy and then the Norfolk Southwestern rail line. So I took from his house here, if you look at the line that's going straight up and down the north and south line, that is Kennedy Avenue right there in Hammond. And then over to the far right, you'll see highlighted with a starred balloon where Norfolk Southeastern Railroad is. And we take that because it goes diagonally across. And you can see right there where Kennedy Avenue and Norfolk Railroad meet, right there in that particular area. So the Hammond police, as they continued to keep looking, then gave these three big, stunning possibilities that they thought could have happened to Joseph. So they thought he could be a victim of foul play, that he could have gotten onto a freight that Sunday afternoon, which could mean that he could be almost anywhere in the country. And then they said that he could have died from exposure, either from sleeping outside or aboard a freight. Well, I mean, kind of the third one, you can kind of knock out the possibility that he would have fallen asleep outside, just due to the fact that if he did, you would still find his body somewhere.
Exactly.
So, and again, Hammond is up there near Chicago. And so when you're talking about this weather in January, you are talking weather that is near freezing, between 32, 38. I know there's a slide that we talk about the average temperature, but you're talking about near freezing. So then again, the articles and stuff continue about that he is still missing, and what they're continuing to do to try to look for Joseph, and trying to get all the story together of everything happening to him. Now, one of the comments that was said, that friends had said about him being seen near an old cemetery. Again, like I said, they said along Kennedy Avenue near Norfolk and Western Railroads. So the map that I showed you guys, when I show from his house, when I show it taking up Kennedy Avenue, and then I show where Norfolk crossed, this is St. Mary's Church that I saw along that map, that was right there along the map. Now, this fence is the opening part, the gate part, I should explain, that is facing out towards Kennedy Avenue. But if you can kind of see, which for me was kind of creepy, because you can see the railway right there where the arms go down, the old fashioned, the trains come in The arms go down and block people from crossing. This right here that you can see, that is actually the intersection of the Norfolk train, Western Railroad tracks, and Kennedy Avenue right here. So this is the gate for St. Mary's on that street. And then let me show you, which
That was a bit of a shocker.
yeah, it was a
Yeah.
shocker because as we talk about one of the potential suspects that we're going to share with you guys and say why, because he was a child killer along the tracks, you'll see why this is important.
And this is the last place that Joseph was seen,
Right,
supposedly, right?
right.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the
Yep.
map part of that, guys. So again, right there, you can see on the map, there's Kennedy Avenue. And then you can see that that red balloon with the dot in it says St. Mary Cemetery. And then right there, that intersection, you see to the right of St. Mary Cemetery is where Kennedy Avenue crossing north and south. And then diagonal, that is the cross for the Norfolk and South Railway system. So we can see again, then here's the map. The star with the dot in it to the left is Joseph's house. And then, sorry, my dog likes to bark when I'm on the computer.
He likes to chime in his thoughts.
He does. He always has a thought.
He loves true crime.
He does love true crime and dead animals, but that's a whole nother story I could tell you guys later.
That's for the end.
Yeah, that's a funny joke. You guys want to hear what wonderful
And
thing he
Mama
brought
Bear.
to me.
He loves Mama Bear too.
Yes, he does like to hear your voice there. So we see there's Joseph's house. Here's St. Mary's Cemetery. It's up on the north, highlighted in yellow. Again, where Kennedy Avenue cross and the Norfolk Southern Railroad is crossing. And then at the bottom lower right that's highlighted, that is their family's church. Now, I know with the map that looks like it's far, far away, but it's not. The distance itself is not far to walk. So, so here's another look at it, street view. So I think the street view kind of gives you a better of it. Doesn't take, that long to walk up a couple blocks and then cross over. So those are all circled in red for you guys to see. And then we're going to start going into the St. Mary's Cemetery to kind of let you see that again a little bit closer. So now we're going in on an aerial view of St. Mary's Cemetery where Joseph Spisak was last seen. The thing I want to call your guys' attention to is that this is right there. You can see the Norfolk, right, the railroad. You can see both the railroad line right there. But you can see that for the cemetery, on that side of it, there is no gate. There's only the gated fence on the Kennedy Avenue side of it, not along where the railroad system is. So you can just openly see the trees and all that there. This is a little bit more of an aerial view. So this is the intersection here, about to the middle. You can see where Kennedy Avenue and the railway line is passing. That's where people saw him at 5 p.m. on that day. So, and then again, he could be playing and going around into the cemetery right here. Again, a little bit north, a closer look. Kennedy Avenue, 2 lanes, both sides. Railroad crossing right there. So now, later on, while the police were searching, they did uncover remains of a bonfire and clean wooden, basically unused matches under a bridge that was at Kennedy Avenue. And then a plastic lean-to shelter about 60 feet from the tracks. But they can't say for certain, like if Joseph would have used it, or honestly, guys, anybody. I know that the paper was saying it was Joseph, but that could mean anybody over there.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be our suspect that we are going to be talking about. So Right here on the bottom part of this photo, guys, you see the highlighted yellow with the red circle. That is St. Mary's Cemetery that we were just looking in. That corner right there is the Kennedy Avenue Railroad crossing that Joseph was last seen at. Now, the red balloon with the dot is an area called Hammond Diamond Railway Crossing. And the reason I'm going to point this out to you is because here he is, he's playing. They see him at 5 o'clock right there. Again, this is only, a couple of blocks farther up. But in this area, this is where the railroad crossings cross north to south and east to west. And that's a big deal. Hammond, because it's on that northwest corner of Indiana, has tons and tons of tracks that are going through because of Chicago. It uses that northwest corner of Indiana predominantly, also because you've got steel and other things that are coming out of the factories that are up there in northwest Indiana, like out of Gary, out of the East Chicago area. That's where all of this stuff is hustle and bustled. And out of Indiana, the northwest part of Indiana predominantly has tons and tons of train tracks going through moving things. But right this couple of blocks up here, we see that right from where the corner he's right near where there is a north, south, and east west crossing. Again, this balloon here is showing that crossing. You can see there's kind of woods and stuff right there. That again, that they look and search along that north side of 173rd Street. And then again, they're checking water, they're checking woods, anything from that particular area at the time. So the police had sent out teletype to other departments. I know that sounds old because it is old. Again, remember, guys, they're not sitting here using computers. They don't sit here and have reports and stuff that go. There's no fax machines. There's no cell phones. There's no text messages. There's no emails and communications and stuff like that. There is no internet. So they have to communicate somehow about that. They wanted people to check for miles from the railroad system and helicopter. And what I do here is, as you see in the red bubble on the highlighted part in the middle of the screen, there's where Hammond is. Well, here's the railroad line going, and that yellow line going north and south that I marked for you guys, there's the state border that you're already in the state of Illinois. So, this is 85 days later. And I know that some of you will notice some of these towns, even if you're not from Indiana, just because of what we cover for other cases. But they sent officers down to Kokomo and Kentucky for what they thought may be leads that didn't turn up anything. And then this is when they talk about that, again, they suspect a victim of foul play. Then he could have got on a freight train and died of exposure. So when you look at this case, the last time that family had reached out and an update in this case happened in the Post-Tribune in 2019. And I just want to point out to everybody, this poor Joseph has been missing for 49 years. This has been a 49-year-old case.
So sad.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I can't even imagine having to live with not knowing what happened to your child for that long.
Exactly.
And they went, and the family had spoke about this case in 2019 to the Tribune, and this is his mother and brother. So his mother, Monica Spisak, and his brother, Joseph. This is his sister, Elsa, who had spoke out as well um, about the case and about him being missing. And during this, they really talked a lot about how they have become, you know, very paranoid about where their own kids go after their brother ends up missing, right? They don't let their
Yeah.
kids go anywhere.
Can you
Um,
imagine? Yeah. I wouldn't even let them go to school.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
I'd want to know where they are every minute of every day.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then these are his other brothers. Thomas is at the left and Dave is on the right. So during the case itself, there was, the mother had talked first of all during that interview that she was really upset because she has very little photos left of him. And basically, due to the fact that she sat here and gave so many when they were trying to look for him to so many individual people and the police that it was she just um ran out of
Photos.
stuff, of photos and
That,
stuff because there was a
They
flood.
didn't have printers then.
Yeah.
that is
You-
so sad to
yeah,
think
and
about.
you can't just easily go to a
Kinko's or
yeah, and get extra copies and stuff.
Yeah, like you don't have these things saved somewhere, like,
on your
yeah,
hard drive or a thumb
no,
drive
you
or
don't have
whatever.
extra copies, like,
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
that's
And
Yeah,
perfect.
so
that's so sad.
yeah. And so there was a flood and it had ruined a bunch of photos, which Hammond has a lot of that because it's right near the Calumet River. And the Calumet River it comes off of Lake Michigan, comes to Calumet River. And so there's a lot of flooding and stuff that happens in houses, especially, if you've got basements and stuff in there. But she talks about how she has very little photos that are left. So, his family talked about how they never saw him again. They still want to know what happened to him. It's been 49 years. And they had ended up sending the dental and medical records out because they had even questioned if he could have been a victim of John Wayne Gacy, which you guys know. That's the famous killer clown who lived in, was from Illinois, right? But again, because Hammond is close to that Illinois line, there were victims of his that were from Indiana.
Yep.
And so that's the one reason that they checked it.
Yeah, and there's still victims of John Wayne Gacy that haven't been identified, if I'm correct.
Right,
So,
right.
mhm.
And we know when they all came out and did that big show that they were trying to, try to get people, if you had a missing relative, to send DNA specifically
Yeah,
to that project. But and then there was a big rumor that people were passing around. We know how that can happen. But there was a big rumor at the time that people were trying to even accuse um, Joseph's father, that they were trying to say that maybe Joseph's father had done something to him. So, one, we had the serial killer that we did a show on that we covered. David Maust was a serial killer. I think from his mental illness and the similarities of him being a pedophile, as well as that him uh, turning around and hiding the bodies
yeah,
in
the
the
way he
basement.
disposed of them.
I mean,
Yeah,
isn't that strange? I mean, we always
that
talk
is,
about the
yeah,
possibility of them, like these people that do crimes like this, of somehow that they know each other or communicate with each other or whatever. I just find it kind of eerie of the way John Wayne Gacy did that, and then how
yeah.
David Maust did the
Right.
same type of thing.
And for the time, like we were talking about, it would have been very hard to communicate with somebody like at a distance from you, even if you had the same interests.
Right.
So the fact that they were in close proximity at the same kind of time, disposing of bodies the same way, is quite eerie.
Very.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So they had to use, basically they used the ground penetrating radar when they checked on David Maust. Now we know, guys, because of the timing, even though David Maust lived in Hammond, where Joseph Spisak was from, he was not connected due to the timeline of David Maust's timeline and what was going on, and then Joseph Spisak.
Right.
So that was not a connection.
They
But
can't be connected, yes.
right.
No, he was incarcerated at the time. So
Right.
Yeah.
So then we've got the ground penetrating radar sonar they did use at the old Spizak's home, just to clarify that there was nothing going on, that Joseph's father had done anything or the family had done anything. So there wasn't anything found at the home. And then they even talk about that the family even had tried to work with psychics to try to just get some type of answers and to see if they could get something from somewhere, about what happened to him.
you would
So
do anything at that point. You would try anything, I
right.
mean, that's just reality as a parent, you would.
So we're going to talk about William Guatney, who is known as Freight Train. He's Freight Train Killer. He had aliases known as Junior and Choo Choo, and even Harold Guatney. He was a suspected serial killer who was accused of killing 15 boys in 4 states. Through 1969 through 1983 was the time frame of suspicion. We know Nebraska, Kansas, Illinois, and Arizona. And he was a drifter who frequently traveled by train. And we're going to talk about him because there are similarities and possibilities that we think could even connect William, or as we will call him, the Freight Train Killer. So we have a map here that we just want to show. So William was born in 1922. This is a map of Indiana back in 1947 that shows all of the railway map at that time in 47 of already railroads that were going through. Again, if you look up in the northwest part of Indiana, you can see how much the railway are passing through, coming over, crossing over, going into Chicago just by looking at that map alone.
Yep.
And then here's another map. Again, this is a little bit more updated, highlighted in color just because of the different lines that were different stuff. But again, if you look, here we go. Here's Northwest Indiana right here. Just below in Chicago, and you can see how much intersection and stuff that is. The reason we're pointing that out is because Freight Train traveled the rails, and that's how he got around. And honestly, and I don't want to say that not like he paid a ticket and got around that way. He jumped on trains and freely rode to go around places, because that's what people did. They, back early on, they didn't have cars, but
And he was a
eventually,
drifter.
yeah.
And he was young when he started this too, so it wasn't like, so it was back in the day.
So the things that are similar and why we think that there could be a potential here is that, so Freight Train was born on Valentine's Day in 1922 in Pekin, Illinois. We're going to show you how close that is to Hammond. He was abandoned by his mom shortly after he was born, and then he was adopted by Bert and Ruby Guatney, was where he's got his name from. And forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, but that's just how I'm pronouncing it. He spent his childhood in rural areas, basically after he was adopted in Fredina and Trace, Kansas. But his adoptive father worked in a coal mine. He ended up catching pneumonia. And then he died really young in 1935. He was about 35, 36 when he passed away.
Yep.
So then Freight Train had to go. And remember, he was born in 22. So by this point, he's 13 years old. He has to go live with his grandparents. And then he later moves in with his brother and his sister-in-law. But he dropped out of school in 35 at age 13, and he started living in the streets. And he was stealing and drinking alcohol already, and he was repeatedly arrested for like public intoxication, theft, and indecent exposure at a very young age.
Yes, 13 years old.
I mean, don't you think that's scary? I mean, I could bring a whole nother case up right now, but I won't. I mean, don't you think it's scary at that young of a teenage age to already be committing those types of crimes?
Very. 13 years of age.
Definite red flag. Mm-hmm.
So then we get to 1942, where he's drafted in the Army for 2 years. He does the tank division. And then in 44, when he's 22, there is a accident where he received severe shrapnel wounds to the head, and he got an honorable discharge. So he could spend the time like basically recuperating at the Veterans Hospital in Boise, Idaho. So while he's being treated from that, he's suffering from memory lapses and shows visible signs of confusion. And then in 1947, at 25, he's admitted to a psychiatric hospital for treatment. And then after undergoing several psychiatric tests, he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, as well as organic brain damage brought on by alcoholism. Think about that. He's already has brain damage from alcoholism, guys. Isn't that crazy?
The age of 22, right?
Well, 25 by the end of that one.
By that one, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's just crazy to be drinking that much already.
That's
so from 1947 through 79, he had to be hospitalized a total of 66 times in psychiatric clinics across the nation. And despite his mental illness, he was not known to exhibit any violent traits until 1979 at age 57. And he was described in a positive manner by most who interacted with him. And during this, he had maintained basically only a relationship with his brother and sister-in-law occasionally, who he would visit when they lived in Kansas. Before we move on, don't you guys think it's weird? I mean, obviously, if he has signs of mental illness that he has to be hospitalized 66 times,
Yes.
I'm still
Again, red flag.
Right, but they just had said before then he is paranoid schizophrenia.
But yet he's a nice guy.
Well, maybe because they're grown-ups and they're not children.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Put on one front to an adult.
I mean, he's not going to tell all these adults what he's thinking of and what he wants to do. Like, so they're going to think he's fine. He's a good guy. He seems fine.
Sure. You want to come around my children? No problem. Yeah.
Well, and you know what? I mean, it does make me suspect, just like David Maust, when he got put in a children's home and he got put in psychiatric hospitals and stuff like that, he suffered from basically being sexually abused as a child himself.
Right.
So it does make me wonder at the young age that Freight Train had this happen. I mean, was this just something that came on to him, or could have he potentially been a victim of,
I mean,
that kind of thing himself even.
I think from anyone who looks into true crime, it can go either way. So there's so many cases where people have had stuff happen to them as a child and then they go on to commit things like that themselves. And then there's other cases of ones that you can't pinpoint any abuse in their childhood and they still go on to commit these crimes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
it's a hard one.
He's hard because you don't know much, obviously, since his mother abandoned him, and he was young. So it's not like, he was old enough to really know. Uh, but from everything I think we saw, the Guatneys were actually good parents, so it's hard to say, to get into his mind.
So now we go into the murders that Freight Train was accused of doing. So he was questioned about the 1975 murders of 12-year-old Jacob Serber and 13-year-old John Simpson that happened in Lincoln, Nebraska. The boys had gone missing on August 30th of 1975 after attending the Nebraska State Fair. So Serber's body was found 9 days later, south of the fairgrounds, and his body had multiple stab wounds. Simpson's body was found in a closed hopper car not until September 22nd. The hopper car had been moved by a railroad train to Council Bluffs, Iowa, and then returned to Lincoln a few days later. So the medical examiner, who was unable to determine what caused Simpson's death, so he was the one found in the hopper car, due to the severe decomposition, but he ruled that he had likely been stabbed to death as well because of chipping wounds that were on his actual bones. So Freight Train had denied any involvement, and since there was no evidence to arrest him then, he was released, and then he quickly took off to Nebraska. So these are the two boys. This is John and Jacob, who were missing together. They were friends. They went to the fair and stuff that day. And when they were looking for the kids. And this is when they actually found John Simpson. And so this was the article in the paper regarding that. You can see from the railroad hopper car that they're removing his remains, and that the newspaper is talking about the actual stab wounds and stuff that were on the bones of John Simpson, who was found later.
One thing I wanted to point out real quick, if you don't mind, JC, is he liked to frequent fairgrounds, and the children just were enthralled with him because of the noises that he would make of the freight train and everything. And he would, remember, give them licorice, and so.
And he would do odd jobs for the different area
Fairs.
too. So
Yep.
kind of like a carny type of thing,
Yep.
but the cattle, he would do stuff with cattle and stuff like that because, he'd hop the train, work whatever to earn whatever money that he could. And
So there was a lot of access to children.
Yeah. And so you've got, then suddenly that the newspapers are having about kids who they're finding dead. This is talking about a connection back in two states. Now, back then in the 70s, again, there's no DNA, there isn't anything. That's why a lot of these cases, there's so many cold cases. And honestly, when you think about, we talk about how scary the times are now. And then if you had a parent who or yourself who lived through these 70s, which we did. I mean, think about how many active serial killers were going on in the 70s, right? I mean, you've got the John Wayne Gacy we talk about, right? We got
Ted Bundy.
Yeah, Ted Bundy. They're all happened in the 70s, and we talk about, boy, the times are violent, and then they go back and look at how many serial killers were alive while you were alive, and they're like, wait
Yeah,
a minute, you
I'm
lived
pretty
8
sure
years.
there's a meme. There's like a meme that goes around on social media that says like the 70s was the most peaceful time, and then it shows you all the
Right.
serial killers that were
Right.
happening.
And what was the reason? The reason is because police, everything was like local. So if there was a murder, they looked local. They weren't really sharing information with department versus department, even in their own state, let alone crossing state lines. They didn't do that. And so we also, what do we not have back then? We don't have a list of people who have commit sex crimes or a list of pedophiles. There is none. You don't know who's been charged with anything like that. You don't know who to watch out for in a certain area and stuff like that.
Right.
So all of the resources that at least we do have now, we did not have then. So that they were even slowly starting to connect some of this information was at least a good thing. But so by 1979, law enforcement officials gathered at a meeting in Topeka, Kansas, and they formed a task force to investigate the murders of 15 boys believed to have been killed by the same perpetrator, because they were talking a lot about people, being stabbed, and the wounds and stuff like that being like, and that's one thing, Mama Bear, you want to bring up what he was known to carry around with him?
Yeah, the railroad tie. And that was one of what they said was his weapon of choice. That, and
So yeah,
yes,
he would walk around with that, and they thought that could be similar to stab wounds and stuff that were
yeah,
happening. So by this point, those 15 victims ranges happened between the ages of 8 years old and 14. They were murdered between January of 72 and mid 1983. So kind of remember that time range here as we will move forward as well. And the states at that point were in Nebraska, Illinois, Kansas, and Arizona. So they had all been found near railroad facilities during the fairs, making investigators believe that the killer might be employed at the fair. And then during the investigation, it was determined that Freight Train worked at the fairs as a cattle herder and was known to easily gain the trust of children because of his ability to intimidate and imitate various sounds using only his voice.
he probably did intimidate though too. JSD, you were probably right about that assumption. So.
Right. It was also suspicious because there was worry because they also discovered that he had a letter opener that they seized, and during that in 1976 interrogation was found to match the width and depth of a murder weapon used in the killing of Serber. So, isn't that sad? I mean, no matter what time frame, children are just, they're so innocent to believe that somebody is not going to be um, with ill intentions ever.
Yeah, I mean, as a child, did you ever have that thought when a stranger approached you or you talked to a stranger? I mean, there's probably so many times where I probably spoke to someone I shouldn't have.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know. I had pretty strict parents that, obviously with being up there near, because lived up in their area when John Wayne Gacy was found. And, after that kind of stuff you had parents who were very paranoid back then. They were very cautious because they were worried about, like, there was weirdos out there. Right. And so, then you're kind of like, kind of scared, and the don't talk to strangers type of thing started
Yeah,
back then.
But for
yeah,
the most part, we were out playing. Your parents, at least for
yeah.
me anyway, you were
I
told
mean,
Be back by dusk. Dinner will be ready. You were out. I'll take
Even
my.
even when I was a young child, like I'd get home from school, I'd phone my friend on the landline and we'd meet somewhere and then we'd all be out until a certain time where I went home. Like nobody had any contact with me the whole time. And I was probably about 12 years old.
Wow.
Hmm.
Well, and I think the other thing that we learned later with Ted Bundy and some other people is that when you think of a stranger, when you think of somebody who's in there, you think of him looking like a monster, right? He's scary looking. He would be a scary man, right? It would be a scary person. And then when they sat here and then they kind of tell you that a stranger is anybody that you don't know well versus what in your mind's eye you would think this murderer would be, where that was the fascination of like a Ted Bundy, right? You think all like Charles Manson is the guy you expect to see, who you're like, holy shit, I'd never go near him, right? But if you're walking down the street and you saw Ted Bundy in there, he would not necessarily be somebody you would be scared of because he just looked like a normal person, you
Yeah,
know?
and like the tactics he would use is, he had an impairment and he needed help in some sort of way
Right.
from
Broken
someone.
arm, broken
Uh-huh.
leg. Yep. Looking
Yeah.
for assistance. Yep.
And if he's working at a fair and he's definitely around tons of kids who back then, of course, your parents would let you go, walk around the fair with your friends, you know. And he did a lot of other stuff where he would meet kids, he would get off the railroad, any kids that were nearby that he would sit there and there were some areas where he would go and stay. And then he would sit there and like we know of the one that he said he would go fishing with. We know about the bike riding with, right? We know about that he's just out and about talking to these children while they're doing normal stuff and he strikes up conversations with them and is entertaining them to get them near him. So we look at some articles here. This was an article that they did that the friends just insisted that he was no killer, but talked about the police that would keep track of him after they thought that he was a suspect, because he was a wanderer. And after this point, then when the police start tracking of where he was located, when they could prove at certain places that he was located at, was he visiting somebody, was he seeing somebody, or could they figure out like what trains he was hopping on and off and where he would famously um, take take uh, take the kids. So they basically tracked then freight train for 3 years, which back then is just like a huge deal. I mean, for them to track him for such a long time. But he really talked about that the person committing the crimes is another man. But when he says another man, it's not another man like you think of, like he's accusing
Right.
somebody else.
Oh,
His other man, he's meaning him.
yep. Another personality.
Yeah, he swears there's another personality in him that keeps killing boys. Isn't that interesting though? Because you have to believe, is that something? I mean, nowadays when you hear it, you're suspicious whether there's somebody's using it to get out of the crime. Is he using it because somebody told him, or was this something that really came out of his mind that he thinks it's really an actual different human being committing these murders?
Gosh. Again, with it, unfortunately, he does have the brain injury, as we know. He's
Hmm.
schizophrenic, but I don't know. Not really sure what he
Again, the
really.
brain injury thing is a common thing with serial killers.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, a lot of them
And
have that.
don't forget, guys, we have a twist that's going to happen at the end of this that will
I
go a
know.
whole different direction than what you think is going to happen.
Instead of
So
taking a right, we're going to take a left.
yeah. So So when we continue, so on August 20th of 79, Freight Train is finally arrested by the authorities in Springfield, Illinois, and was charged with the murders of Serber and Simpson. In addition, he was proposed as a suspect in the murder of 11-year-old Jay Durnall that was in Omaha, Nebraska, the murder of a girl in Hutchinson, Kansas. There was another murder of a boy in Rock Island, Illinois. And then there was the murder of 3 boys. There was 11-year-old Richard Chase Jr., 9-year-old Russell Chase, so they were brothers, and then their 10-year-old cousin, David Johns, that was in Chandler, Arizona, and several other killings. So we've got a whole bunch of killings and stuff that they start bringing up, and I'm fixing to show you some articles on those. Following his arrest, he was then extradited to Topeka, Kansas, where he was charged with the murder of 12-year-old John Hanron Jr., who was killed on May 20th of 1979, shortly after leaving a bowling club. So when we go here goes with a first arraignment on charges that he had. And this was a family who basically had befriended Freight Train, and he had stayed with them, and they had multiple children, which is scary all by itself. And then this is the photo and continuation of the stories about Jay Durnall. The first one was just about him being missing and his mother's worry and her suspecting that he was abducted, them asking and trying to find him, the next thing, and then the final one where his body was found in the Missouri River, where he was stabbed multiple times, and then he was thrown in the river near the actual railroad tracks for that case. This is the 3 boys that I mentioned the names for and talked about the 2 brothers and the cousin. Now, they were Native American. And in this particular article, they discussed how the boys, when they were found, they ended up finding out that they were stabbed to death, but they were all ran over by a train, by a freight train. So that's when the autopsy came back and said that these boys, ranging ages 8 to 12, they were already dead before the freight train ran them over. So again, these are all that the police were trying to give them to Freight Train. Although in argument, some of these murders obviously could have been committed by another pedophile who's near the freight train, or they even had potential other suspects that could have possibly done some of the murders they were trying to bring all around. So after pleading guilty, Freight Train was extradited to Lincoln, Nebraska, where he was charged with the murders of Serber and Simpson. He was also among the prime suspects for the murder of 9-year-old Mark Helmig in his hometown in Pekin, Illinois, not that very far from Indiana, as well as the murder of 14-year-old Marty Lancaster near the fairgrounds in Normal. And Lancaster's decomposed body was found in the underbrush near some railroad tracks about a month after he disappeared in June of 1978. So remember, this is 1978. Our boy is missing, in the 70s as well. And so, you got to look at the timeline and where everybody's being found. So he died from several head injuries. Helmut had been strangled and he was naked. His decomposing body was found inside a hopper car near the railroad station in East Peoria, Illinois, in August of 1976. So 3 weeks after he disappeared. So after the arraignment of Freight Train, he pled not guilty to the murders, claiming that he suffered from multiple personality disorder and that his evil alter ego was the one who killed the boys. So during the interviews with friends and acquaintances, several of them corroborated his testimony, stating that shortly before his arrest, Freight Train had told them he had mental health issues and that an alter ego was killing young boys. So even though that's not a straight confession to the murders, guys, when he's saying he has an alter ego and then says the alter ego is killing young boys, don't you think that's kind of some admittance right there?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So the two boys that we just talked about that he was accused of killing this time, this is the story of Marty Lancaster and Mark Helmweg, that he killed. As you can tell, these are mainly mostly Midwest, the train rails that he's hopping here in the Midwest. So then we go that in January of 1980. So think about that. I mean, I know there's really young kids probably. If you're watching and you're born after 1980, just don't tell me. I don't want to know. But at age 58, but it's not that long ago. So at age 58, Freight Train's trial for the murders of Serber and Simpson began in Lancaster County, Nebraska. During his proceedings, he exhibited troubling behavior and was easily agitated. I wonder who that also sounds like. Leading his attorneys to petition for a medical examination to determine whether he was sane to stand trial. The motion was granted in June, and then they transferred him to Lincoln Regional Center, where in December of that year, he was found mentally competent to stand trial. So he could stand trial then. And then in spite of that diagnosis, Freight Train's mental state began to rapidly deteriorate. That sounds like somebody too. So it started going downhill the very next year in 1981.
Don't know
And
who you're talking about.
I know.
So
Psychiatrists conducted various tests on him and determined that he suffered from delusions and had trouble knowing reality from fiction. He gradually developed delusions and then hallucinations, leading to his attorney to petition for a new trial in August, which was granted yet again when he was examined for a second time at Lincoln Regional Center on September 2nd. Freight Train was found to be unfit to stand trial. So a whole year later. As a result, all charges against him were dismissed on the grounds of insanity. Mind blown.
Yep.
Mind blown.
Shocking.
Who cares if you're insane? If you're insane, you still committed the murders.
Exactly.
I think you should still, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Somebody out there, don't you think, though, you should still be found guilty that you murdered somebody? It doesn't matter that you're insane.
Exactly. You did it with your own hands.
I mean, you may not be able to go for the death penalty or something, but yes, there still should be charges,
Well, because a lot of them, why do they do that? They do it because then they want the mental hospital to say they're okay. And then because they weren't convicted of murder, then mental hospitals can release them. And then they were never charged with murder.
Exactly.
I think you should be able to have both happen. I think that you're insane and you murdered people. So as soon as you're healed, you should go to jail. You murdered people.
Opinion, yes.
In my absolutely right opinion, I'm sorry. I'm not arguing right there. I'm just saying, you shouldn't have a way to go. So then this is the article where the judge again finds that he's, incompetent again. So he's placed, you guys are gonna, this shit's gonna blow your mind. So he was placed at a mental facility in December of 81. He escapes. And then in just 2 weeks later, he was found wandering near some railroad tracks on December 17th.
Shocker.
And then he's finally returned to the facility quickly because after he escapes. And the staff were charged with dereliction of duty, and after which, by court order, Freight Train was once again placed in the Lincoln Regional Center. Then, after receiving the air quotes appropriate treatment, he was transferred to the Good Samaritan Village Nursing Home in Alliance, Nebraska in late of 81. Before being moved to the Walsworth Old Soldiers Home, which is now known as Dwight D. Eisenhower Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Leavenworth, Kansas. So then in mid of 83, he manages to leave the facility undetected again and resumed his previous lifestyle again, meaning back on the rails, guys.
Yeah.
But then was soon arrested again in Nebraska on suspicion of murder in Bellevue.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So then ultimately he was ruled out, but was soon placed in a psychiatric hospital to resume treatment. And then Freight Train spent his last years at a mental institution in eastern Kansas, where he died on March 31st of 1996. So his guilt in all these murders remains subject for a lot of debate.
Yes.
So this is just copies of information, the Lancaster public defender that he had, and the judge who ruled that, he had brain damage and he's mentally ill, and he's nearly perpetually drunk, hobo. I didn't know that could get you out of in there. I can walk around as a drunk hobo and do whatever I want to now. I guess I don't know what that means, but so then we see the articles that show that then they clear him as suspect in these 5 deaths that they had, right? The little 14-year-old Marty Lancaster in Normal, Mark Helmig, 11, in Piqua, Illinois, and then 5 other deaths. So those 2, basically, those were the suspect who was in there, and then these 5 other deaths. He remains a suspect in the 76 killings of an 11-year-old in Omaha, Nebraska, and some other murder charges, but they never get to really try him because once he had the insanity, there was nothing anybody else could do. So this is showing the article when he finally got sent to the Good Samaritan nursing home where they were caring for him. Wait for the twist coming, guys. Okay. So this just shows you the distance between Hammond, Indiana, and Pekin, Illinois. Now, I show you that because the 2 boys that he got in the fairgrounds and stuff like that, and where he was located, Hammond, Indiana is not that far from Pekin. And then, you've got Peoria, Illinois as well, that he had killed another kid, and he's not that far from that location. So, sit here, we look at, here is Freight Train. He had 0 convictions for murder, guys, even though he confessed to 3 murders after he was arrested. He's found unfit to stand trial.
Mm-hmm.
He was detained this whole life in mental institutions, although obviously we can't keep him there because he keeps going back and forth and escaping. So his murder stats are, they suspected him of at least at 15. He confessed to 3. He's convicted of 0. So look at these poor kids who never had justice whatsoever.
Yeah.
So sad. Breaks my heart.
And the silhouettes of children represent children as well, because in the old newspapers that I went through, there were images just couldn't find of the kids published in the newspapers. But these are all uh, kids that they suspected that he actually murdered. So, could Joseph Spisak be a victim of freight train? We see him near the train tracks. We see him that's the last time where his friends saw him. He's walking along, and where we've got the crossroads of all of those, that he easily could have been taken on a freight train. If he was outside or if he ran away, I argue the fact that at 11 years old, by the time it hit 30 something degrees, his butt would have been back home because it's freezing as could be. If he would have froze to death outside, they would have found his body.
Yep.
But he could have been one that is picked up, remains end up inside a freight train somewhere, and we don't know.
Mm.
So
he could have been dumped anywhere, unfortunately, because of the train lines. Anyway.
Right, because like a couple of them were thrown in the river near the freight train.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's the twist. Could Joseph Spisak be connected to Johnny Gosch and the other missing paper boys? So we know that Johnny Gosch was kidnapped on September 5th of 1982. It was in Des Moines, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
He's sitting here. He goes out to do his route, and he's, out and about, whatever, that morning. And later, he's dropping off the papers, picking up his newspaper, whatever, and his last sighting of Johnny Gosch that could be corroborated by multiple witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, but another paper boy, if you guys remember that case, and again, if you guys want us to dive into that case, we can definitely cover it. But another paper boy named Mike reported that he observed Gosch talking to a stocky man in a blue two-toned car near the paper drop. Another witness, John Rossi, saw the man in the blue car talking to Gosch and thought something was wrong. Gosch told Rossi that the man was asking for directions and asked Rossi to help, but Rossi looked at the license plate and he could not recall what the plate was.
Yeah.
Now, if you watched from the beginning, or if you're going to rewind this, you saw that we talked about that there were people who reported to Joseph Spisak's mother and family later that he was knocking on people's doors, telling them that there was a blue car following him.
Mm-hmm.
So, could we be looking at the difference of a 1974 kidnapping of a paper boy who was being followed in Hammond, Indiana, which, as you can tell, here's the distance between Hammond, Indiana and Des Moines, Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
6-hour difference. So Hammond, though, kidnapping a boy, 1974. Then we have all the Des Moines disappearances of boys being kidnapped, with Johnny Gosch being the main one that we all started hearing about, and then learning of the others, happened in 1982. So could a man in the same blue car have kidnapped Joseph Spisak in 1974 and then kidnapped Johnny Gosch in 1982?
I think there's a very strong possibility. It's very ironic. blue car for both paper boys.
Yeah. And if I'm correct, I remember with the Johnny Gosh case that not only was it witnessed that he was speaking to somebody in a blue car about directions, but I also remember a witness stating that they then later saw somebody come in between two houses and grab Johnny and put him in to that blue car. So like more than one person in that case.
And you know what, and that's kind of the difference. It's, back there when you look at cases from, the 70s and stuff like that, that's like talking about, the children of the snow, or the kids that were missing in the Detroit suburbs in Michigan,
Hmm.
because those kids were all being picked up and kidnapped. They were being picked up and kidnapped just walking to the store, walking home from getting off the bus, boys
Yeah.
and girls that were being taken. And then that they were connected to pedophiles, right? Who, that's what they would do. They would kidnap them, they would take images and stuff them, they would take pictures and stuff up with them, and then they would end up murdering those kids and leaving those kids on the side. And then they were connected to a very rich man who owned that island of off Michigan, who was supposed to be taking children there who were uh, right, misfortunate children, and it was supposed to be this great place to try to take kids
Yeah,
who needed
help
help
them.
and attention, and then they would take them to this island and take pictures of them and do the same kind of thing there. And that guy got away with it. I mean, he took off and left the country, and they never busted him for that. But that's kind of the old school thing of what they did. They kidnapped the girls and the boys, walking home, riding their bikes, delivering newspapers, right? On their way to Boy Scouts, on their way to Girl Scouts, selling cookies, right? That was kind of the thing that they knew, that they would
Hmm.
sit there and do. Versus now, honestly, I feel like the internet has made it way easier for these guys to get a hold of kids.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You can get in touch with anybody. It's
So
scary.
it really is. It really is. So, chat, what are your guys' thoughts on the possibility of Freight Train and Joseph Spizak's case, and the possibility of maybe even Johnny Gosh connection of a blue car following Joseph?
Is anybody saying anything?
Kel just said, "Oh my God, yes, the internet is so dangerous."
Yeah,
Um,
we all know that.
Also said, we're told as little girls had to watch out more than little boys, but after research, little boys were in serious danger too. Right. It was kind of more secretive. It was
Yep.
much more secretive of what they were um, doing to boys. And that crime for kids right now is up.
Yep.
The
That still
guys who
holds
want
true
images,
today.
they don't just want images of girls, they get images of boys. Why do you think most of those guys don't have just a teenage boy they're pretending to be? They also pretend they're a girl.
Sounds like somebody else we know.
Mm-mm.
I knew she'd use that word. Kelt goes, JSD, I think you have two possible hypotheses. She always uses that word.
Come up here, Cal. Come on.
Thank you,
That-
Kelt.
That's her word.
Let's see. Ray Jones. Thank God. I grew up in Virginia Beach, and we had an incident within my inner circle of lifelong friends when we were 11. Oh my God, Ray.
Oh, okay.
Did somebody was somebody kidnapped or the attempted kidnap? I mean, wasn't that thing, they always like stranger danger, right? And they would teach you,
Right.
don't get near somebody's car. Don't, like, what was the thing? Oh, hey, I have a puppy. Come help me look for my puppy. Right. Or they ask you to get a question and drag you in the car vehicle. That was kind of type
Like I
of things.
said,
Not that that doesn't happen still, but
well, like I said, even with Freight Train, his big thing was he would give the kids candy. You know, oh, come on, guys, I'll give you some candy. Let's go for a walk. Oh, I want to show you something. You know, that was one of his big maneuvers. Oh, we can go take a look at the train, and we
so
could go fishing.
one thing
You know.
that I will share, also, by the way, is that the officer who's working at the Hammond Police, one of the officers who's working at the Hammond Police Department, um, who grew up in Hammond, Indiana as well, he is friends with one of Joseph Spisak's brothers, and he grew up with him. And so when he grew up, he always knew about Joseph and Joseph being missing. And so he had asked the Hammond police for him to be able to continue to look into Joseph Spisak's case. And so his name is Sergeant Adam Clark. He is a Hammond police department, works for Hammond Police Department. And, so he is still trying to help the family get answers. But obviously, as this case is so cold after 49 years and without finding remains, that is what is, really, really difficult for him. So, and I want to ask Paige a question. But let me read what Ray put in here. Ray says a friend was raped in front of his brother and another friend. A crackhead did it. Oh my God, Ray. That's horrible.
Right. So sorry.
Yeah.
That is so horrible.
And what do you do as a child seeing this? You're scared. So you're going to listen because you're afraid of what may happen to you.
Well,
You know?
and you know what? And do kids ever get justice? Because you're not the same when something like that happens to you.
No.
You're not the same.
No, trauma is real.
So, Paige, let's kind of bring up just briefly, because I know we've talked about trying to set up a show and stuff on it, but let's talk about briefly about remains that are found that have not been identified, and how that kind of works and stuff like that, because I know you look into a lot of that type of stuff.
Yeah, so in the UK, I tend to look at NamUs, but also the Doe network. And on there, you can kind of go by geographical location, alphabetical, the year, and you can look at unidentified people who have been found, but also missing people that have been reported across the world in many different timelines. So from I've seen from the 1920s all the way to the present day. And on those websites, I'm not sure about the US, I'm sure you've got different kind of areas to go to as well, but those are the ones I focused on in the UK. And on there, you can kind of see from any location, you can type in, where you live or a place in America that maybe that somebody has gone missing and never been found. And you can look at unidentified people in those periods of time and actually see if you can identify any similarities in those, which I think is very important for people to be doing. I don't know about you guys, if you look at the same sort of things or if you have any other websites that are really good that we should be looking at.
Well, we do have NamUs here. And then we do have a John and Jane Doe network. And I do know that, Kelt has looked at some of that stuff as well. And from her,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and for you both bringing those type of things up, I was kind of surprised myself to go in there and to see when I looked at it, that all of a sudden it tells you you
Yeah.
can look in your own state, guys. You can
Yes.
look
But
at who they
I wanna mention a trigger warning, because on some of those you might be able to see autopsy images, and crime scene images as well, which obviously some people might not want to view, but you don't have to click on them. There is a warning before you do, but there is an accurate description of what they found, that person, what weight they were, that kind of thing, the clothing or jewelry they might have been found with. You can see that information, which is quite valuable, especially if you're looking into any cold cases.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
JST, I don't know if you remember, just makes me think of the one. Remember the one that you and I were looking at one day? That one female? And I mean,
Yes.
the clothes she had on, they were, very distinct. She had that ring on, so many things that were identifiers to her that you would think some family member would come forward or someone would know something. And she was still listed on the.
Yeah, and I
It
think
just,
Yeah.
part of the challenge is because a lot one, I think it's great that now not only the forensics DNA, but the genealogy DNA that people are able to do, because then they can look more into finding
Yeah.
out where like a victim suddenly came from. I mean, we had a girl whose body she was missing for a very long time. It was a cold case. And then it was also a cold case in Tennessee because they found her body in Tennessee. But after they
Hmm.
finally did all this, they found that this little girl that was missing from Indiana's body was a body found a long time ago in Tennessee, and they didn't know that it was her. So, so they were able to do that. Now they still have to go and find out who committed the murder and what
right,
happened from the murder, but that now at least
Yeah.
we know, okay, this is where she is, this is what's happened, and go on. And yeah, Mama Bear, when we looked at the one, um, which we may sit here and bring that one in particular up, but there's some that they can bring up in your state, and they say, hey, we found the remains, we don't know what they look like because how long ago it was, right? All they know
right,
is that they found maybe decomposed, and whatever clothes or whatever um, jewelry or items that they may have with them. And then they say they were found in like blah, 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 Indiana. Well, just like the Tennessee person, that doesn't mean that she was from Tennessee. She wasn't. She was
exactly.
taken out of the state of
Mhm.
Indiana. She was left in Tennessee. So it's
Yeah.
really looking at that NamUs stuff and
Hmm.
Northrop,
seeing
Anna.
And
seeing those cases. You know what I mean?
just look at the amount of cold cases that have been solved recently because of this kind of technology we now have. People are submitting their DNA, and like people who have been unidentified for years are now being named again. Like this is the kind of stuff we want to do, it's so
Right.
important.
I mean, Kelt's very, very familiar with Orthram. I mean, very familiar. So,
Well, and remember the other case that we brought up, we did the video on Herb Baumeister, the serial killer from Indiana, and they continued to dig up DNA and had 25 additional victims that were trying to identify after they went back on the property again. And that's one that we shared, that they are looking for possible matches to those DNA. So if you're from Indiana, if you are from Ohio, because those are the two ones he most frequented, but I would even say surrounding Indiana, period. I'd say Illinois, I'd say Michigan, right? I'd say Kentucky. If you have a male relative who is missing during that time frame, which was during that 80s time frame and early 90s time frame, that the Hamilton County Coroner's Office would like for you to turn in DNA to them. I would argue just to turn it in, period, to the uh, group for it to be looked into, period, that it can be checked and
Yeah.
matched with any case, because that's going to save you a lot of time with that. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, look at Joseph Zarelli, the boy in the box. Like, how
Oh,
oh,
many
yeah.
years did we not know his
gosh.
name? It is possible.
Yes.
People just need to do their part.
Well, and
I
you know
mean,
How?
what? There's a lot of cases that I wish they would do DNA still on. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
So
Like, I'm going to
many.
throw this one out there. I'm sorry. I think John Benet Ramsey, I want the DNA. I do at least agree with the father that the DNA should be independently looked at
Tested.
and
Yep.
tested.
Yep.
And give it to Cece.
Like,
Let Cece investigate the DNA on it.
no
And
matter the opinion of people in regards to her death and who might be involved, like, we need this to be done. And her dad is actively trying to push that. So we've seen. So, yeah, we need that to happen.
It's
Right.
She needs
closure
that
for
to
the
happen.
families. That's the thing.
Like, yeah.
I mean, if you find the body, you can identify the body. At least the family has closure to that. Yes, they still have to go on and try to figure out who
Yeah, like,
murdered that
absolutely.
person,
We need,
child,
like,
whatever.
it needs to be known.
But at least the family has a little bit of closure. I mean,
Yes.
well, and
Yeah.
I think, you know what? And honestly, I mean, that's like some of these cases. I know that people argue because of this thing, but when you have a case that gets screwed up so badly from a prosecutor, for example, and that no justice got served from somebody, it does make me question the whole double jeopardy thing, because I feel like if you have a case and suddenly, just like I think, so let me argue both sides. I think if you find DNA that proves that somebody's innocent, instantly that should be automatic, that it is re-looked at, re-brought up, re-shown that they have proved now that a case that did not have the DNA testing and you're innocent, then that is automatic, that you should sit here and relook at the case. But that, I feel the same way though about cases. I'm going to bring her up. Casey Anthony.
Oh, God.
If Casey Anthony got away with murdering her own daughter.
Yeah, let's say Kaylee Anthony. Yeah, we want
And
justice for Kaylee.
Right. But I think that if they turned around and now with the DNA, right, they had the tape that was put up against her face, right? They had the sticker that was put up against her face. Because remember, a lot of the DNA and stuff was ruined because she sat in water for a long period of time. But
in Florida.
And Florida is not
in the summer.
Exactly. And so if they were able to pull something up and they could say that, like, her, the mother's DNA is on the tape, right? That went around her head and went around her face.
She was found with her blanket too.
Exactly.
Her Winnie the Pooh blanket.
Exactly. I mean, and that's one where it's like, because, and then we get to a point where, what if there is a murderer who does not, they're clever enough to make sure there is no DNA. Does that mean we'll never convict somebody of a murder if we don't have forensic evidence? Do you know what I mean? Like, will it never happen again? Because before, there had always been cases. It was very high-end circumstantial evidence. You had to use common sense, which isn't common anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look how many people have probably been convicted of something they didn't do. Like,
right.
I'm gonna say the West Memphis Three. Sorry, guys. Yeah.
No, I get you. That's a big one. And I know there's lots of cases some of the cases where, we play both sides of that. We all have different thoughts and stuff on that. So those would be great debates if we ever want to do those and stuff as well. Back and forth on it. Because sometimes I'm like, that's kind of weird. Or I'm like, wait a minute.
And that's
right?
another case where DNA is really, like, it needs to be looked at again.
Yeah.
Like,
agreed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that this case it's very sad that we have a mother in her 80s, that had been sitting here waiting for this case, as we saw the article, that this boy has been missing for 49 years, that his sister and brothers are, wondering just to know what happened to him. Is just truly, truly sad. And this is just another case that wanted to create awareness of, kind of thought about when we, looking at, him being near the train, the railroad, and the timing and stuff of everything, that this could have been the case, that, freight train killer could have been a potential out there. And then as looked further and went through all of these old newspaper articles, and also saw about a blue car being identified that was around him, at least, he could, like I said, he completed his route, and he reported this before the route. But that's a little kind of a coincidence there too, that Johnny Gosh had the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huge.
And it is hard with cases from earlier on, because we really only have like witness statements and stuff to go from in like timelines and stuff like that. We don't have really anything else, like you said. So there's no sort of pinging of any location on a phone. There's none of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what's hard about this cold case. And
So
we
sad.
feel for the the officer, at the Hammond Police Department, who's trying to help that family, who's trying to help with what they can do. If remains or something was found that they could compare DNA to, I feel like, kind of that may be the only hope, because you don't know unless you find the remains. So, Sergeant Adam Clark, obviously, if there's any information or anything that people would know, calling the Hammond Police Department about that. But it does make it very difficult, with it being 49 years ago, and trying to solve this case. But we wanted to cover Joseph. We want to remember Joseph. We want prayers for his family, and hope that maybe one day there can be justice done for him. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that his remains could be found for the family.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
He needs to
Well,
go back home.
well, I appreciate my beautiful crew members up here. Mama Bear, thank you for being up here.
Thank
And
you,
I
Justice, for
appreciate
having
you.
me up.
And Miss Page, I appreciate you, even though you're like 5 hours later than what we are. God bless her.
It's almost 2 a.m.
Yes, I know.
That's dedication.
It is
But I
dedication.
appreciate you having me.
No, love
Thank
having
you for
you.
having
But
us
normally
up.
when it's my 2 a.m., that's when she's normally messaging and going, "Hey, good morning. Anybody awake?"
Yeah. I'm like, wake up now. I want to talk.
And sometimes I am. So there you go. That's what that is. So I thank
And
you
thank
both
you to
for being
everybody
up
in
here.
chat, too.
Yes.
We appreciate you all.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you,
Well, thank
ladies.
you. All right.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night. And thank you, Miss Kelt, for sitting here and modding, and Miss Jinx, thank you for coming in and modding and stuff as well. I appreciate you. We wanted to bring this case and stuff to you guys, and I do appreciate all of you. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. We have some more cases that we're going to be throwing up. You will continue to see the short videos of us spotlighting some of the worst of people who have been arrested, connected in Indiana for the CSAM. So I appreciate all of you for being here. And thank you so much for making sure that justice is served daily. Good night, everybody.